Good day everyone, Dr. Polaris here. In today's episode, we will be examining the case of a supposed living pterosaur in the Congo. This mystery animal, known as the Kongamato, meaning breaker of boats, is claimed to inhabit the dense rainforests of Central Africa. First sighted in the 1920s, the Kongamato is described as being a large red or black creature with leathery wings, a body devoid of feathers, and a narrow snout full of sharp teeth. The creature also possesses a long thin tail tipped with a diamond-shaped pad or vein. According to cryptozoologists, this cryptid can only be some sort of living pterosaur, often cited as a late surviving species of Rhamphorhynchus. There are numerous problems with this identification, however, which I will cover later. The other group pushing the idea of the Kongamato being a living pterosaur are the young Earth creationists, who claim that potential living fossils explain biblical accounts of dragons and other clearly mythical beasts that lived alongside people. I shouldn't have to explain why this is a farcical idea, I'm sure. But for now, let us turn to the first recorded encounters with the Kongamato made by European explorers in the early 20th century. Unlike the Mokele Mbembe and the Emela Ntuka, there are actually written records that describe detailed encounters with the Kongamato. The oldest of these that I could find dates to 1923. A traveller by the name of Frank H Mellon was working for a time in Zambia, gathering native reports of mysterious, ferocious flying reptiles often talked about among the villagers. The natives called the creature Kongamato, meaning breaker of boats, which was said to live in the Jiundu swamps in the Mwinilunga district in Western Zambia, near the border of the Congo and Angola. It was described as having no feathers at all, smooth skin, a wingspan between 4 and 7 feet, and possessing a beak full of teeth. They were commonly described as black or red. Amazingly, it had a reputation for capsizing canoes and causing death to anyone who merely looked at it. Mr. Mayland, when showing drawings of pterosaurs to the people, writes, "Every native present immediately and unhesitatingly picked it out and identified it as a Kongamato. Among the natives who did so was a headman from the Jiundu country, where the Kongamato is supposed to be active, and who is a rather wild and quite unsophisticated native." Apparently, Mayland thought by emphasising the savage and primitive nature of this chieftain would make his claims seem all the more credible. The next recorded sighting of the creature came 2 years later. In 1925, English newspaper correspondent G. Ward Price, along with the future Duke of Windsor, took an official visit to Rhodesia. While there, they reported a story that a civil servant had told them of the wounding of a man who had entered a feared swamp, a place known to be the abode of demons. According to the story, the brave native entered the swamp, determined to explore it in spite of the dangers. When returning, they found him on the verge of death. With a great wound in his chest, the native recounted how a strange, huge bird with a long beak attacked him. The civil servant, wanting to identify the creature, showed the man a picture of a pterosaur from a book of prehistoric animals. When observing the drawing, the man screamed in terror, fleeing from the servant's home. Again, the native witness is claimed to have identified this unknown mystery bird with a picture of a pterosaur, with the idea being that such a primitive man would know nothing about prehistoric animals. However, I do find it interesting that Prince notes that the locals associated the site of the attack with demons. In many non-European cultures, demons are thought of as being physical beings as real as any human or other animal. Perhaps the natives thought of the Kongamato in this way, as evil spirits with a physical presence, capable of attacking people and destroying their canoes if angered. The fact that the British men who heard of these aggressive flying beings from the locals immediately identified them as being surviving pterosaurs is not surprising, as discussed in earlier episodes in this series. For Western observers at the time, it was perfectly reasonable to assume that living prehistoric animals would still dwell in the dark depths of the primordial Congo. This view certainly coloured responses to the next encounter linked to the Kongamato, that of zoologist Ivan T. Sanderson. In 1932, the Percy Sladen expedition journeyed to West Africa in the employment of the British Museum in London. In charge of the team was Ivan T. Sanderson, a well-known zoologist and writer. While in the Asumbo Mountains in Cameroon, they made camp in a wooded valley near a steep banked river. One evening, as the team was hunting near the river, Sanderson shot and killed a large fruit-eating bat, and when the animal fell into the water, Sanderson carefully began to make his way over to it in the fast-moving current. As he himself writes, he accidentally lost his balance and fell. While regaining his balance, his companion suddenly shouted in horror, "Look out!" It was at this time that the aforementioned written occurrence took place, and was a day that Ivan T. Sanderson never forgot. He wrote, "And I looked. Then I let out a shout also, and instantly bobbed down under the water, because, coming straight at me only a few feet above the water, was a black thing the size of an eagle. I had only a glimpse of its face, yet that was quite sufficient, for its lower jaw hung open and bore a semicircle of pointed white teeth, set about with their own width apart from each other. When I emerged, it was gone. George was facing the other way, blazing off his second barrel. I arrived dripping on my rock, and we looked at each other again. 'Will it come back?' we chorused. And just before it became too dark to see, it came again, hurtling back down the river, its teeth chattering, the air shushing, as if it was cleft by the great black Dracula-like wings. We were both off guard, my gun was unloaded, and the brute made straight for George. He ducked. The animal soared over him and was at once swallowed up into the night. He and George, when returning to camp, immediately asked the natives about the creature. Sanderson asked them, spreading his arms in a bird-like fashion, 'What kind of bat is this, and is it all black?' 'Olitau,' was the response. The natives questioned the two where they had seen the creature. Sanderson pointed back at the river, and upon doing so, the natives reportedly fled in terror in the opposite direction, taking only their guns and leaving their valuables behind. Notice that the creature in this account is never stated to be a pterosaur at all, but a large fruit bat seen in poor light conditions by a man unfamiliar with the sights and sounds of the Congo rainforest. It was only later, when cryptozoologists and creationists got hold of this story, did the animal morph into a prehistoric pterosaur. Is it not more plausible that Sanderson exaggerated this account due to the sense of fear that he felt during this admittedly intense and frightening encounter? From here, just as with the Mokele Mbembe, the sightings dry up for a couple of decades until 1956, when engineer JPF Brown sighted a pair of unknown flying animals near Lake Bangweulu, that place again, in Zambia, and was reported in the April 2nd, 1957 edition of the Rhodesia Herald newspaper. Brown was driving back to Salisbury from a visit to Kasenga in Zaire. He stopped at a location called Fort Rosebery, just to the west of Lake Bangweulu, to get his canteen from the trunk. It was about 6 p.m. when he saw two creatures flying slowly and silently directly overhead. He observed that they looked prehistoric, with a long tail and narrow head. He estimated a wingspan of about 3 to 3.5 feet. One of them opened its mouth, in which he saw a large number of pointed teeth. Further reports of such odd flying creatures come from the Awemba tribe, that claims that they live in caves in the cliffs near the source of the Great Zambezi River. What he meant by looking prehistoric, I'm not so sure, but it again is not a coincidence that this Western observer associated the jungles around him with the supposedly primordial world of the Mesozoic. There is also something very much of Conan Doyle's Lost World to these sightings, which I don't think is accidental at all. Doyle's book was immensely popular and featured a captured pterosaur, described in strikingly similar fashion to the reports of the Kongamato, as a major plot point. As with the Loch Ness Monster, popular culture now as then was a big influence on the appearance of these cryptids. Again, sightings stopped for another couple of decades until everyone's favourite cryptozoology enthusiast, Dr. Roy Mackal, In 1988, Mackle led an expedition to Namibia where reports of a creature with a wingspan of up to 30 feet were gathered. As was the case with all of Mackle's proposed prehistoric survivors, there was no hard evidence to prove the existence of the Kongamato. However, team member James Cosey reportedly saw the cryptid from about 1,000 feet away. He described it as a giant glider-shaped creature that was black with white markings. Suddenly, the Kongamato has transformed into Rodan, especially considering that all of the earlier accounts describe animals with wingspans of up to 9 feet only. But, as we have seen, anything goes in the world of Roy Mackle. The most recent account of an expedition to look for the Kongamato that I could find was apparently launched in 2010 by Genesis Park, an evangelical Christian group keen on promoting the idea that prehistoric animals have always lived alongside men. Coincidentally, Genesis Park has a laughable website that purports to list the many evidences for Earth being only a few thousand years old. According to the information found on this website, Genesis Park staff mount an exploratory trip deep into the Bangweulu swamps. Zambian fishermen were interviewed and all-night vigils were conducted. But no definitive evidence for the existence of the Kongamato was obtained. I guess they just didn't have enough faith in their divinely inspired mission. In a similar vein, renowned evangelical grifter and charlatan Kent Hovind recounted a story concerning a phone call that he apparently received some time ago. A college student from Kenya, surprised over the fact that Americans believe pterosaurs to have existed millions of years ago, allegedly told Hovind over the phone one evening of the flying reptiles of his native land. In detail, he explained their natural habits. They considered them pests, similar to buzzards. A common problem they have, explained the student, is making sure to bury their dead deep enough. Interestingly, the Kongamatos will unearth buried natives and feed upon their dead flesh. I really hope that this college student was trolling the ever-gullible Hovind to see just how ignorant he really is. So, with all joking aside, what could explain these sightings? Two species of birds live in Zambia's swampy regions that might be mistaken for this cryptid. The shoebill stork is a dark feathered bird, has an 8 feet wingspan and a strange appearance. There's no evidence of the bird acting aggressively towards humans, which they always try to avoid. The saddle-billed stork has a wingspan of up to 8 feet, a bright red bill with a stripe, and black and yellow feathers that run down from the eyes to the stripe of the head. This bird also has an unusual profile while flying, holding its long narrow beak downwards, and often startling those seeing them for the first time. When seen at night or in poor light conditions, it is easy to imagine a person unfamiliar with these animals coming away confused as to the identity of what they had just seen. The same could also be said for the large fruit bats that inhabit the Congo region. If you couple these factors with the erroneous idea of Africa being a primordial dark continent, it is not difficult to see why Western explorers would return home with tales of flying prehistoric beasts. What can be stated with confidence is that there are no pterosaurs in the Congo. This group of flying archosaurs died out 65 million years ago, along with all non-avian dinosaurs. No fossils of pterosaurs from after this point have been discovered anywhere in the world, and things only get worse for Kongamato enthusiasts from here. The cryptid as described is clearly just a scaled-up Rhamphorhynchus, a small, long-tailed pterosaur from the late Jurassic period. Unfortunately for the true believers, Rhamphorhynchus and all small, long-tailed, toothy pterosaurs of this type had died out by the early Cretaceous, long before the Maastrichtian extinction event 65 million years ago. Only the larger, short-tailed pterodactyloid pterosaurs made it to the end of the Cretaceous. Also, it is more than a touch suspicious that descriptions of the Kongamato are a perfect match for the outdated early 20th century view of pterosaurs as scaly, leathery-winged monstrosities. Modern research has shown that these animals were covered in a short layer of hair-like filaments, not bare scales. The Kongamato, then, is best seen as a relic of both the early 20th century state of paleontology and colonialist attitudes towards Africa. Thank you for listening, everyone. Next week, I'll be continuing my exploration of Alter Earth and speculative evolution, so be sure not to miss out, and I'll see you again soon. Cheerio!